We've talked about cells communicating through electrical signals, about cells emitting a faint light known as biophotons, about the possibility that water behaves differently near biological structures, even how magnetite appears in our brains and how humans react to changes in magnetic fields. And let's not forget about the idea that many biological materials utilize liquid crystalline structure. Each of these topics come from legitimate areas of scientific research, yet none of them on their own overturn our understanding of biology. But I think when you step back and look at them together, they start to form something extraordinary, a new way of seeing the body, something that starts to communicate a pattern. And that pattern raises a question I did not expect to be asking, quite honestly. After 10 years of college, I thought I understood biology, that I understood the body. But when I first started reading these publications and exploring these topics, I began to wonder, are we thinking about the human body in the right way? Because the deeper you look into living systems, the more they seem to rely not just on chemistry, not just DNA, but on something else as well: structure, electricity, energy gradients, and patterns of organization we are only beginning to understand. And that is what I want to talk about today, to start to put the pieces together and honestly to ask you for your thoughts and feedback on what all of this might mean. But before attempting to put the pieces together, let's briefly start with the way most of us were taught to think about biology. Typically, biology is presented primarily through the lens of chemistry. Cells are described as biochemical systems where molecules interact through reactions. Enzymes speed up those reactions, proteins bind to receptors, and hormones carry signals from one place to another. Then there's metabolic pathways, which move energy through the system step by step. And that framework is incredibly powerful. It explains an enormous amount of what is happening inside living organisms, and much of modern medicine depends on it. I do not deny any of this, but it also creates a very specific mental picture of the body. For example, when most of us imagine a cell, we picture a membrane surrounding a small volume of fluid. Inside that fluid are organelles and molecules moving around, colliding, binding, separating, and reacting. Water is usually treated as the background environment where these reactions happen. It's the medium, the solvent, the space where biology takes place. In that picture, the important actors are the molecules themselves: proteins, DNA, ions, and signaling molecules. And again, biology becomes a story of chemical interactions occurring inside a watery container. Here, water is a bystander. This model does work well. It also has allowed scientists to map metabolic pathways, understand genetic regulation, develop pharmaceuticals, and explain many diseases. But as researchers have looked more closely at living systems, they have repeatedly encountered phenomena that do not fit neatly into that purely chemical picture. This may highlight how our model is incomplete. And when you start looking deeper into these ideas that we talk about here on this channel, something interesting begins to happen. They start looking less like isolated curiosities and more like clues that something else is going on. In general, scientists keep discovering that living systems rely on forms of organization and communication that look as much like physics as they do chemistry. One of the clearest examples of this pattern is electricity. We tend to think of electricity as something that belongs to the brain or nervous system, but in reality, electrical gradients exist across almost every living cell. Those electrical signals appear to do far more than just move ions around. In developmental biology, researchers have discovered that patterns of voltage appear across tissues before organs even form. In other words, electrical signals seem to show up before the physical structures appear. In regeneration experiments, scientists have found that changing the electrical state of tissue can change what structure grows back, alter the electrical signals in the right way, and the pattern of regeneration changes. Bioelectricity also appears at the moment the body begins repairing itself. When skin is injured, measurable electric currents immediately flow across the wound, and cells begin migrating along those electrical gradients, allowing the tissue to heal. Researchers have also noticed that many cancer cells show different electrical states than the healthy cells around them. This raises the possibility that electrical patterns may play a role in how tissues maintain normal organization and health. Another theme that appears in living systems is light. Living cells emit extremely faint photons as part of normal metabolism. These emissions are known as biophotons. They are so weak that the human eyes cannot detect them, but sensitive instruments can measure them. In fact, they have found that the human body is constantly emitting tiny amounts of light. What makes this even more interesting is that the amount of light changes. When cells are stressed or damaged, biophoton emission can increase, suggesting that this light is tied to state and metabolic activity inside the cell. In some experiments, scientists have even observed waves of photon emission moving across tissues, hinting that light may not be completely random. Researchers are still trying to understand what role these photons might play. Some have explored whether biophotons could be involved in cell to cell signaling, in the regulation of oxidative metabolism, or in helping synchronize activity across groups of cells. These ideas are still being investigated, but the discovery itself is striking. Cells quietly emit measurable light as part of being alive. Another place biology begins to look very different is structure. Collagen, one of the most abundant proteins in the body, makes up roughly 30% of all human proteins. It forms long, highly organized fibers throughout skin, fascia, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, and the connective tissue that holds organs in place. When scientists studied its physical properties, they discovered something surprising. Collagen can behave like a liquid crystal. Liquid crystals are materials that flow like a liquid but maintain ordered molecular alignment like a crystal. And collagen is not the only place this kind of organization appears in biology. Cell membranes exist in liquid crystalline phases. DNA molecules can form a liquid crystalline arrangement. Even elements of the cytoskeleton inside cells can align in similar ordered ways. In other words, parts of the body are built for materials that are organized at the molecular level, not simply random mixtures of molecules in a fluid. Collagen, in particular, adds another intriguing property. It is known to be piezoelectric, meaning that when it is stretched or compressed, it can generate tiny electrical signals. Materials that convert mechanical force into electricity are known as transducers. So every time tissue is stretched, compressed, or moved, collagen fibers may be converting mechanical forces into electrical signals inside the body. This means large portions of the body may be built from ordered, electrically responsive biological materials. Even water itself may behave very differently inside living systems. Water is usually described as a simple, universal solvent where biological reactions take place. But researchers have observed something much more organized. Water can form regions where dissolved molecules and particles are pushed entirely away. These regions are sometimes called exclusion zones. What surprised researchers most is their size. Instead of forming layers only a few molecules thick, they can extend far past that depending on conditions. Even more surprising, these zones are electrically charged. The structured water near a surface tends to carry a negative charge, while the surrounding water becomes enriched with positive charge. In other words, the water itself separates charge. That separation of charge means the system behaves like a tiny battery. Another intriguing detail is that light appears to influence this structure. In laboratory experiments, infrared light can cause these exclusion zones to grow larger, suggesting that radiant energy may help organize the water. Taken together, these observations suggest that water near biological surfaces may not simply be a passive background fluid. It may be part of a dynamic system capable of storing energy, organizing charge, and interacting with light. And then there is the body's interaction with the physical environment itself. Researchers studying human brain tissue have discovered tiny crystals of magnetite, a naturally occurring magnetic iron mineral, embedded in brain samples. Now, magnetite is not just any mineral, it is literally the same material used in compass needles. Finding it in the brain immediately raised questions because magnetite is known to play a role in magnetic sensing in some animals. And the story honestly becomes even more intriguing. In a controlled laboratory experiment, researchers exposed volunteers to extremely weak magnetic fields, roughly equal to Earth's natural magnetic field. When the orientation of the field was slowly rotated, measurable changes appeared in the brain's electrical activity, even though the participants reported no conscious awareness of the change. Exactly what this means is still being studied, but it suggests that the relationship between living systems and the physical environment may be more subtle than we once assumed. Each of these discoveries taken alone might seem like an isolated curiosity, but when the same kinds of ideas keep appearing across biology, electricity guiding growth, cells emitting light, tissue showing organized structure, water behaving differently near surfaces, and organisms interacting with unseen fields, when all this is taken together, a pattern begins to emerge. Life is not just chemistry happening in water. It also involves patterns of structure, electrical organization, and subtle physical interactions that operate alongside the chemistry. And once that pattern emerges, the human body starts to take on a whole new look. Instead of being a machine in the cold mechanical sense, the body starts to look like an ongoing conversation between different layers of reality. Chemistry, yes, but also electricity, structure, tension, charge, light, and even a kind of spatial memory. Sure, chemistry may be the most visible layer, the one we learned first because it is easier to isolate and easier to test. But underneath that, I keep wondering if something more integrative is happening, something that uses all of these layers we've talked about to organize the body and move information. And maybe that is the way it has to be, because building and maintaining something as complex as a living body may require more than molecules reacting in isolation. It may require systems that allow millions, even trillions of cells to stay coordinated across space and time, constantly adjusting, communicating, and holding the organism together as a coherent whole. I think there may be a kind of whole body intelligence that is not located in one place, one that extends beyond the brain and allows the body to respond, adapt, organize, and even remember in ways that integrate both the seen and unseen. I keep wondering if this is how form is created and remembered, not just genetically specified, but a field of instructions that can be maintained and recalled, as if the body knows somehow what it is trying to be and is constantly working to stay in conversation with that pattern. Consider this. Every day, our cells are dividing, dying, and undergoing changes from all kinds of stressors. Yet, despite this, we remain relatively the same whole that was here yesterday and hopefully tomorrow, maintaining shape and form. This leads me to believe that tissues know more than we think they know. I also keep coming back to the idea that coherence may matter as much as our matter. The same molecules can exist in a different arrangement and produce a completely different outcome. The same tissue can be healthy or disordered depending on how well communication and state is preserved across the system. So perhaps health is not only about what is present, maybe it is also about what is still connected, what is still synchronized, and what is still speaking to what. And maybe that is part of why the body uses so many different kinds of signals at once. Electrical gradients can move quickly across tissues. Mechanical tension can spread through structural networks. Light and energy shifts can communicate state. And structured environments can stabilize patterns across space. Different processes integrating the whole. Most of all, I keep thinking we may have badly underestimated how remarkable the body actually is. And knowing all of this makes me see my body in a whole new light. Living matter is unique because it is exquisitely sensitive to force, to charge, to fields, to structure, sensitive to rhythm, sensitive to disruption and alignment. Maybe life is what matter looks like when it becomes deeply responsive to itself. Here, the science is the science. The findings we've talked about exist whether any larger meaning comes from them or not. The thoughts I've shared here are simply my reflections, my attempt to step back, place these pieces next to each other, and ask what kind of picture they might be hinting at. I certainly do not claim to have the answer. In many ways, I'm still trying to figure out what I think myself, and I'm sure it will evolve over time. But one of the things I enjoy most about exploring topics like this is that they invite us to think a little more deeply about what life actually is. Not just the parts we can measure, but the patterns these parts form when they come together. I am genuinely curious how you see it. When you step back and look at these discoveries, what kind of story do you think they might be telling? Do they change the way you think about the body at all? Or do they simply add another layer of complexity? However, you interpret it, I'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, stay curious and take care.